Elena froze like a leaf upon a pond. Human voices approached, strange, sharp, with metallic notes of authority. The bucket of blueberries tumbled from her trembling hands, scattering the inky black berries along the narrow forest path. Somewhere in the distance, the roar of an engine echoed, an alien, aggressive sound tearing through the accustomed stillness of the Yellowstone wilderness. "Look, Greg, what a little bird has flown into our trap," croaked a tall, balding man in a camouflage jacket, emerging from behind a century-old pine. No gun, no man, all alone. Sweat ran down his unshaven face, leaving damp trails on his skin. He smelled of cheap tobacco and liquor, scents that never belonged in this forest. "A girl from Timberline," the second man, broad-shouldered with hands covered in intricate tattoos, bared his yellowish teeth. "The park ranger's daughter, I bet. Mark's girl." His eyes, small and piercing, scrutinized her with such brazenness that Elena felt a distinct wave of nausea churning in her stomach. Elena instinctively recoiled, a chill running down her spine. For 17 years she had roamed these woods and never once felt fear, until today. "I was just picking berries." Her voice trembled betrayingly. "My father, he'll be looking for me." Sunlight, filtering through the canopy, cast an intricate mosaic of light and shadow on the forest floor. At another time, Elena could have spent hours watching this play, but now her attention was fixed on the men blocking her path. "He'll look all right, but he won't find you right away." A third poacher, who had materialized behind her, grabbed her elbow. His fingers painfully dug into her soft skin. "You owe us an explanation, sweetheart. Where's your old man hiding the old wolf's den with her pups? We know he knows. And we've been looking for 3 months now. Gray pelts fetch a good price these days." The men closed in, narrowing the circle around her like hungry predators. Elena understood. Screaming was useless. Timberline was 2.5 miles away, Ranger Stevens' cabin even further. A panicked thought flashed through her mind. How stupid of me not to bring Dad's two-way radio! She tried to pull her arm free, but his grip was iron. The air filled with the scent of sweat and fear, her own fear, which seemed to envelop her in an invisible cloud. Somewhere in the depths of her memory, a recollection flickered, so distant it felt like a dream. Before we begin, please tell us where you're from, subscribe, like, and watch until the end. Here we go. It was Mark Corbin's lot, a hereditary park ranger in the Timberline Reserve, to live in a peculiar time. A time when, at the turn of the century, old and new were locked in irreconcilable conflict, and rules and laws changed faster than the ink could dry on paper. It was April of 2015. The first true spring after a long winter was spilling across the Appalachian forests in green rivulets of sprouting grass. Snow still lay in the hollows and ravines, but the sun was now brazenly peering into the most hidden corners of the forest. Mark walked along a familiar trail, accompanied by his 8-year-old daughter, Elena. The girl chirped incessantly, constantly darting off to the right or left of the path to examine wildflowers or listen to a bird song. "Dad, is it true that bears wake up grumpy and hungry in the spring?" Elena hopped over a stream, pausing for a second to admire the reflection of the clouds in the clear water. The stream water was so cold it numbed her fingers. Elena dipped her hand into the current, teasing the darting fry that flashed like silver arrows between the stones. "It's true," Mark smiled, adjusting the strap of his shotgun on his shoulder with a practiced motion. The weight of the weapon was reassuring. Here, deep in the forest, a shotgun was less a hunting tool and more a guarantee of safety. That's why we only hike on familiar trails and only during the day. The spring sun gilded his thick, dark brown beard with its first strands of gray. At 42, Mark Corbin remained a tall, rugged man, lean, with the firm, confident gait of someone who had spent most of his life on forest trails. What about wolves? Are they grumpy in the spring, too? Elena plucked a young birch leaf and rubbed it between her fingers, inhaling its fresh, tart aroma. Wolves. The ranger stretched out thoughtfully. They're always cautious, Lena, neither grumpy nor friendly. They just live by their own laws. He sat down on a fallen log, pulled a canteen from his pocket, and took a drink before continuing. You see, daughter, a wolf is not a simple creature. The spirit of the forest lives within it. Our ancestors understood this. They respected the wolf. But now, people have forgotten the old truths, and that's why we have problems with our gray brethren. The girl furrowed her fair brows, pondering her father's words, but then was immediately distracted by a jay circling overhead. "Dad, look!" Elena suddenly shouted, pointing ahead. "There! Someone's lying there." The girl pointed to something in a thicket of young aspens about 20 yards from the trail. Her eyes widened with fright and curiosity. Mark instantly tensed and gestured for his daughter to stop. The hunting season was closed until the end of April, but poachers, especially those from the city, rarely bothered with such formalities. "Stay here," he said firmly, taking the shotgun from his shoulder. "Don't move until I get back." "But, Dad," Elena began. "No buts." His voice became stern. "It could be dangerous." Carefully pushing aside the branches of young growth, the ranger saw a strange sight. In a small clearing near a fallen pine lay a dead wolf. Its silver-gray fur was damp from melted snow, and a bloody gunshot wound gaped in its side. Beside it, huddled against its cold mother, whimpered a tiny wolf pup, so small it looked like an ordinary puppy. "You damn scoundrels!" Mark gritted through clenched teeth. "At it again!" He immediately understood that this was the work of Butch White's gang, a notorious poacher in the area, who dealt not only in illegal hunting but also in logging, and even, it was rumored, arms trading. Butch and his cronies hunted for sport, killing animals, often not even bothering to take the pelts, and pregnant females they considered an extra special trophy. Mark had known Butch since school days. He was a couple of grades older, a hooligan, and a bully. Back then, he was just named Connor White, the son of the local farm collective chairman, a chubby kid with a perpetually discontented face. In the 90s, when everything turned upside down, Connor left for the city and returned as a big shot, with money, with bodyguards, with a new name, Butch White, like in a bad gangster movie. "What is it, Dad? Can I see?" Elena's voice pulled Mark from his thoughts. The girl, of course, hadn't listened and was now standing behind him on tiptoes, trying to see the discovery. "Is she dead?" Elena's voice trembled, peering from behind her father's back, hesitant to get closer. "Yes, daughter. Scoundrels killed her." Mark clenched his fists. "And him?" The girl nodded at the pup. "Will he die too?" The ranger sighed deeply. By all the laws of nature, a pup without its mother was doomed, at best a swift death from predators, at worst a slow agony from starvation. "Most likely," he answered honestly. He needs his mother's milk, and without her, Dad, the girl's eyes pleaded, can we take him home? I'll take care of him, honestly. Lena, he's not a kitten. Mark shook his head. He's a wild animal, a predator, small, but still a wolf. Please. Elena clasped her hands in a prayerful gesture. I'll feed him and walk him and do everything myself. She had already knelt beside the pup and was gently stroking its head. The little one, exhausted from hunger and fear, didn't even try to crawl away. It just whimpered softly, pressing against its mother's cold body. Mark hesitated. His mind told him that taming a wild animal was not a smart idea. A wolf wasn't a dog. Sooner or later, nature would take its course. But his heart wouldn't allow him to leave such a helpless creature to certain death. All right, he finally decided. But first, we need to bury his mother. It's not right to leave her like this. Will we bury her like you buried our old dog, Duchess? Elena asked seriously, remembering their old mutt who had died last winter. Yes, Mark nodded, and we'll pick a nice spot where the sun will warm her. Mark hadn't brought a shovel. He hadn't planned on staying in the woods long. He had to dig the hole with his hunting knife, peeling back sod layer by layer. Elena helped as best she could, shoveling loose earth with her hands, tossing aside roots and stones. They dug a hole beneath an old pine and carefully lowered the wolf's body into it. Mark even whispered a short prayer, a mixture of Christian words and old pagan charms his grandfather had once taught him. Receive, Lord, the soul of this innocent beast, he whispered, crossing himself, and grant her peace in your heavenly meadows where there is neither pain nor suffering. Then he added entirely different ancient words not meant to be spoken in church. Mother Earth, take your child. Spirit of the forest, guard her kin. Elena stood nearby, quiet and serious. For her, growing up on the border of two worlds, the modern and the ancient, such a blending of beliefs was natural. She herself added a handful of soil to the grave and placed a juniper sprig on top. So the spirits would find their way, as her father had taught her. The wolf pup was wrapped in his father's jacket. It was still very small, its eyes barely open, its fur soft and fluffy like a kitten's. But even at that age, it was clear that the animal would grow large, wide paws, a massive head, and especially its light gray, almost silver coat, rare for these parts. What shall we name him? Elena carefully cradled the bundle to her chest. The pup had stopped whimpering and was now just softly snuffling. You decide, Mark smiled. He's your wolf. The girl thought for a moment, examining the pup's unusual coloring. Gray, she finally declared, because he's silvery, like old Grandpa Proctor from the village. Mark laughed. All right then, gray it is. But remember, Lena, and his voice grew serious, he's not a toy. He's a wild animal, and he'll only stay with us as long as he chooses to. Then he'll leave. That's his nature. Elena nodded with the seriousness only a child unconditionally accepting new responsibility could manage. I know, Dad. I just want him to live. The first few days were the hardest. The pup refused to eat, and Mark began to fear the little one wouldn't survive. But Elena showed remarkable persistence. She dripped milk into its tiny mouth with an eyedropper her father brought from the district pharmacy, warmed the pup with her own body heat, cuddling it next to her in bed, and patiently massaged its stomach for hours, stimulating digestion. Dad, he's so cold, she said worriedly on the evening of the second day. and he hardly eats anything. Mark himself saw that things were going badly. The little one lay unresponsive, not reacting to touch, its breathing shallow and infrequent. "Let's try a different approach," the ranger suggested. He took off his shirt and wrapped the pup in it. "Hold him like this, close to your body. He needs your body heat, like from his mother." Elena obediently pressed the bundle to her chest, rocking it like a baby. "Now sing," Mark said unexpectedly. "Sing what?" the girl asked, surprised. "Anything. A lullaby. Wolf pups can hear their mother's voice even in the womb. It's important for them." And Elena sang, a soft lullaby her mother had once sung to her. Mark listened to her clear, childish voice, and a lump formed in his throat. At that moment, his daughter looked so much like Barbara, it took his breath away. On the third day, Gray finally ate. He swallowed bread softened in milk and even licked Elena's fingers with his rough tongue. "Look, Dad, he ate!" the girl cried happily when Mark returned from patrolling the reserve. "Then he'll live." The ranger nodded. "Good job, daughter. You have a gentle touch." Trouble with the small predator proved plentiful. At first, Gray slept in a box in the kitchen, lined with old rags. Then, when he grew stronger, he began to explore the house, tentatively at first, then more boldly. By the end of the first month, he was confidently running through all the rooms, playing with rope toys Elena made for him, and even trying to hunt grasshoppers in the yard. In the fall, the girl started third grade. Every morning, Mark drove her to school in his old pickup, picking her up in the evening. When her father was busy, Elena stayed with Mrs. Agatha, who, though she grumbled, loved the girl. By this time, Gray had grown considerably. His puppy plumpness had given way to a lean, adolescent physique, and his playful nature was increasingly superseded by the wariness and caution typical of wild animals. He still rejoiced when Elena returned from school, but no longer with the boisterous enthusiasm of a puppy, but with the dignity of a four-legged protector, as if checking that she was all right. "He's getting smarter every day," Mark remarked one day, watching the wolf pup carefully navigate around the onion beds. Earlier, he would have charged straight through, heedless of the path. "Of course he's getting smarter," Elena replied proudly. "I'm teaching him. Look, Dad, Gray, sit." The pup obediently lowered himself onto his hind legs and froze, eyes fixed on his mistress. "Paw," the girl commanded, and Gray raised his right front paw. "Well, I'll be." Mark shook his head. "A regular circus act. But still, don't forget, Lena, what he is." Elena nodded, but deep down she was sure her Gray was special, not like other wolves, that he would never become mean or dangerous, that he would always be her loyal friend. Her childish heart refused to accept the harsh truth her father knew. Sooner or later, the call of the wild would prove stronger than any attachment. Problems began when Gray turned 1. By this time, he had grown to almost the size of an adult wolf, powerful, with a broad chest and strong paws. More and more often, he would run off into the woods and only return in the evening, dirty, sometimes bloodied, which, Mark understood, was not his own. One day in Timberline, 2 chickens disappeared from a private backyard, and the next morning, a neighbor, former tractor driver Simon Davies, ran to the ranger's house yelling, "Mark, your beast killed my cat. I saw it with my own eyes." Mark understood that the day he had so feared had arrived. You can't keep a wolf as a household pet. Sooner or later, nature takes its course. He talked with his daughter for a long time that evening. Elena cried, but deep down she understood her father's point. "If we don't let him go now," Mark explained softly, "people will kill him. He's a danger to farm animals, you understand? And Gray can't live cooped up. That's like caging a bird. He'll die of loneliness." "What about me?" the girl sobbed. "He's my friend. We saved him." "Precisely for that reason, my dear, we must save him again, from people and from himself. A wolf must live in the forest, among its own kind. That is its destiny." The next day, Mark drove Gray deep into the forest, 20 miles from the village. The wolf obediently trotted behind the pickup truck along the forest road, sometimes overtaking the vehicle and disappearing among the trees, but always returning, as if checking that he hadn't fallen too far behind. Finally, the ranger stopped in a large clearing at the foot of a rocky hill. "You go on alone from here," he said, as if the wolf could understand human speech. "There are good areas here, plenty of game, and hardly any people." Gray stood a few yards from the vehicle, cautiously sniffing the unfamiliar scents. Mark placed a bag of meat scraps he had brought with him on the ground. "This is for your journey, and after that, you're on your own." The wolf didn't move, continuing to stare at the man with its amber eyes. "Go!" Mark suddenly shouted, and made a sharp gesture with his hands as if warding off a predator. "Go into the woods." Gray sprang back several feet, but didn't run away. Then, with a heavy heart, the ranger took out his shotgun and fired into the air. A resonant echo reverberated through the forest. The wolf flinched and vanished among the trees so swiftly it seemed he had never been there at all. Mark looked for a long time in the direction Gray had run, then slowly got into the truck and drove home. His heart was heavy, but he knew he had done the right thing. Elena waited for him on the porch, pale, her eyes red from crying. When her father returned alone, she simply nodded silently and went to her room. That evening, she didn't touch dinner and didn't come out for tea, even though her father had baked her favorite potato rolls. "He will live his true life, Lena," Mark said, looking in on his daughter before bed. "It's better for him." "I know," the girl replied softly. "It's just, I'll miss him." "And so will I," the ranger admitted honestly. "He was a good wolf." Life resumed its course. Weeks turned into months, months into years. Elena grew, transforming from an awkward teenager into a beautiful young woman, increasingly resembling her mother. She excelled in her studies, particularly in biology and geography. Her teachers predicted a brilliant future for her at a university in a big city. Gray was sometimes seen by hunters or foragers, an enormous silver-gray wolf, who, unlike his kin, was not afraid of people, but also never attacked them. Local legends even began to grow around him. Some said he was not a wolf, but a forest spirit in animal form. Others claimed he was a shapeshifter, and still others that he was the leader of a new pack of particularly intelligent and cunning predators. Mark listened to these tales with a smirk, but secretly he was proud of his former charge. Sometimes the ranger would find tracks of a large wolf on his land and could have sworn it was Gray, coming to check on old haunts. This happened especially often in winter. Amidst the untouched snow, the clear imprints of huge paws were visible, leading to the ranger's cabin and back into the thicket. At times, Mark thought he saw the wolf's silhouette at the forest edge, but as soon as he blinked, the vision disappeared. "Checking up on us, wanderer?" the ranger would say into the emptiness. "We miss you too, often." One damp November evening, Gray came to their house. It was a blizzard, and Mark, looking out the window, at first thought it was just a play of light and shadow. But then he realized the wolf was indeed standing in the yard, almost blending with the snowy shroud thanks to his silver-gray fur. Only his amber eyes glowed like two embers in the twilight. "Lena," the ranger called softly, "come here, slowly." The girl came to the window and froze. "Gray," she whispered, "is it really him?" "It's him," her father nodded. "You can go out if you want. Just don't make any sudden moves." Elena slowly dressed, pulled on her winter boots, and stepped out onto the porch. The wolf didn't move, continuing to stare intently at the girl. She carefully descended the steps and stopped a few yards from the creature. "Hello," she said softly. "You came back to visit us?" Gray tilted his head, as if listening to the familiar voice. Then he took a small step forward, then another. Elena extended her hand, slowly, palm up. The wolf cautiously approached, sniffed her fingers, and then gently touched them with his muzzle, as if in greeting. The girl smiled through her tears. "You remember me? I knew it." Mark watched the scene from the window, shotgun at the ready. But Gray behaved calmly, even sedately, like an old friend dropping in to visit old acquaintances. The wolf remained in the yard for about an hour. Elena brought him meat, but he only sniffed the offering and didn't touch it. Then the girl simply sat on the porch, and Gray lay a few steps away, head on paws, eyes closed. It seemed he just needed to be near to smell the home where he had once lived. When the blizzard died down and the moon appeared, the wolf rose, stretched, and cast one last glance at Elena. Then he turned and slowly headed toward the forest. At the edge of the woods he paused, as if indecisive, but then disappeared among the dark firs. "Goodbye," the girl whispered, wiping away frozen tears. "Be safe." After that incident, she and her father often talked about their former pet. Elena thought it was a farewell visit. The wolf seemed to be letting them know he now had his own life, and they wouldn't see him again. But Mark had a different opinion. "He lives nearby now, daughter, and he'll watch over us in his own way. Wolves are like that. They don't forget kindness." Years passed. Elena finished high school, then enrolled in the biology department at a university in Denver. She left for the city with a heavy heart. She didn't want to leave her father alone, but Mark insisted, "You can't stagnate out here in the wilderness. Study, live life to the fullest. I'm not going anywhere. I'll be waiting for you during breaks." University life swept the girl into its whirlwind. New friends, interesting subjects, first love. She came home less and less often, though she regularly called her father and sent him packages with treats and household necessities. Timberline was changing too. A new interstate highway was built through the reserve, and the quiet village suddenly found itself 15 minutes from civilization, as advertised in brochures. Construction of vacation home communities began, and then there was even talk of a ski resort. Along with these changes, poachers began to appear in the forest more and more frequently. These were no longer just local men looking to supplement a meager diet, but wealthy city businessmen for whom hunting was a matter of prestige. They arrived in expensive SUVs with the latest firearms and even thermal imagers, Against such equipment, Mark, with his old single-barrel shotgun and pickup truck, was powerless. Mark Corbin fiercely opposed Butch White's gang. Butch, a former paratrooper and now a successful owner of a chain of auto repair shops, had long had his eye on the reserve. His company, registered under straw men, constantly tried to buy or lease tempting plots of forest allegedly for ecotourism. And while the legal wrangling continued, Butch and his cronies regularly staged illegal hunts, not disdaining to shoot even highly protected species. At the local game management office, all of Mark's complaints were met with shrugs. There wasn't enough evidence, and Butch had serious connections all the way up to state authorities. "You should be careful, Mark," his old friend, Sheriff Deputy Nick Harrison, told him. "These guys don't mess around. You're out in the woods alone, and who knows what could happen." "What are they going to do to me?" the ranger scoffed. "Kill me? At least I'd die with a clear conscience, but to watch them ruin my forest, it sickens me, Nick." Only two circumstances comforted Mark in those difficult years: the support of his daughter, who, despite her studies, remained keenly interested in the life of the reserve, and strange incidents involving the poachers. It started with Butch's crew's traps and snares disappearing from the deep woods. Then someone slashed the tires on their jeeps left in the forest parking lot, and once 4 hunters returned from the forest pale as ghosts and flatly refused to explain what had happened there. "We aimed for a boar, but hit the devil," one of them mumbled before getting incoherently drunk at the local bar. Mark guessed who was behind these incidents. Deep in the forest, a new wolf pack had settled, and its leader, judging by tracks and eyewitness accounts, was a large silver-gray wolf. Gray hadn't just returned, he was protecting his territory. And coincidence or not, his territory perfectly overlapped the reserve area. By entering into open confrontation with the poachers, Mark understood that he was taking a risk, but retreating was not in his character. He began to install camera traps in illegal hunting areas, collected shell casings for ballistic analysis, documented tracks, and reported every violation to the State Forest Management Service. He sent inquiries to the Environmental Prosecutor's Office, gave interviews to local journalists, and tried to organize a public campaign. Butch White initially scoffed at this, but when it came to the first real fines and then a criminal case for shooting a cow elk with 2 calves, his mood changed. Late in the evening of May 2022, a black SUV pulled up to the ranger's house. Butch and 2 of his cronies, without ceremony, entered the yard. The ringleader was without his usual confident smirk. His jaw muscles twitched, his eyes cold and malicious. "Listen here, Ranger," Butch poked Mark's chest. "You've really annoyed us with your tricks. One more stunt from you, and we'll have a different kind of conversation." "Are you threatening me?" Corbin asked calmly, though inside everything tightened. His daughter was due home for summer break in a week, and he didn't want to expose her to danger. "I'm warning you," Butch gritted, "nicely. And tell your city slicker daughter not to poke her nose around here. Things happen to girls in the woods, you know." Mark lunged towards White, but he was held back by the strong arms of the cronies. "Just touch her," the ranger hissed through clenched teeth, "and I'll drag you out from hell itself." "What about me?" The poacher feigned surprise. "I'm a law-abiding citizen. You're the one stirring up guerrilla warfare here. So cool down and think carefully. I'm giving you a week." After they left, Mark sat on the porch for a long time, staring into the dark woods. For the first time in many years, he felt helpless. Butch had power, money, connections. The ranger had only an old shotgun and the truth, which, as everyone knew, didn't always win. He thought about sending Elena to her aunt in Denver for the whole summer, but his daughter flatly refused. "I won't leave you alone, Dad." Her voice held the same stubborn determination as in childhood when she nursed the wolf pup back to health. "We'll handle them, together." Elena arrived 5 days later, tanned, a little thinner after finals, but as energetic as ever. She brought her father new binoculars, a hunting knife, and a tablet with GPS mapping software installed. "We'll fight them with modern methods." She winked at her father. "I've already corresponded with folks from an environmental foundation. They promised legal support." Mark didn't tell his daughter about Butch's visit. He didn't want to scare her, but he warned her not to go into the forest alone, especially towards Wolf Gulch, where Butch's gang was holed up. Of course, Elena didn't listen. That morning, when she went picking blueberries in Bear Hollow, her father was at the other end of the reserve, helping to extinguish a small forest fire. He learned that his daughter had gone into the woods from a worried Mrs. Agatha by phone. "Your girl went towards the hollow with a bucket. I tried to stop her, told her it wasn't good to go so far alone, but she just laughed, said she knew every bush around here since childhood." Mark immediately tried to reach his daughter by phone, but cell service in the forest was spotty at best. Then he was distracted by a new flare-up, and the ranger, with a heavy heart, decided his daughter was old enough to take care of herself. Besides, she really did know these places like the back of her hand. What happened next, Elena later recounted to her father with a mixture of delight and horror in her voice. She was picking berries in an old clear-cut when she heard the rumble of an engine. Cars rarely drove here, especially such loud ones. The girl decided to go to the road and see if lost tourists needed help. But when Butch White himself stepped out of the luxurious SUV, followed by 2 of his cronies, Elena realized she had made a mistake. Holding her breath, Elena watched as the silver-gray wolf slowly approached the stunned poachers. Its movements were fluid, almost graceful, but every step exuded such menace that even Elena, familiar with this animal, felt a chill run down her spine. "Gray, is that really you?" she whispered, disbelieving her eyes. Almost 10 years had passed since her father had taken the small wolf pup deep into the woods. 10 years. A whole wolf's life. Could it be that same Gray, or just a similar wolf, coincidentally appearing at the right moment? Elena saw how the tall poacher tensed, instinctively backing away. The second, the broad-shouldered one with tattoos, froze in place, his gaze fixed on the predator. The third, who had held her elbow, slowly loosened his fingers, as if fearing a sudden movement might provoke an attack. "Whose wolf is that?" the tattooed man croaked. "Where did he come from?" "Shut up, Greg," the tall one hissed through gritted teeth. "And don't make any sudden moves." One of the poachers, a stocky man with a black goatee, slowly reached for the holster on his belt. "Brooks, don't be a fool," Butch White gritted through clenched teeth. "If you start shooting, that beast will attack." "If I don't, he'll still attack," the bearded man snapped. "I've seen wolves like that in the Alaskan wilderness. They eat people without flinching, especially if they're rabid." Gray froze, staring directly at the gang leader. In his amber eyes, Elena read recognition, hatred, or simply animal hunger? Elena couldn't tell, but for some reason she felt that the wolf really did recognize his enemies, perhaps by their scent. After all, these men had come into his territory, had killed his kin, or perhaps he sensed the danger emanating from them, a threat to the forest, to all who lived within it. Wolf memory, deep, ancient, absorbed with his mother's milk, held the image of a man with a weapon as an eternal enemy. But another memory, the memory of Gray, raised in the park ranger's home, told him that people were different, and that the human female standing beside him needed protection. On the count of 3, we scatter in different directions, Butch commanded. Brooks, to the left, towards the car. Greg, to the right, into the woods. I'll go straight to the road. Leave the girl, let the wolf deal with her. 1, 2. He didn't get to 3. It all happened so fast Elena barely registered the movement. Gray leapt, covering about 15 feet in one bound, and his jaws clamped down on Butch White's forearm. A wild scream of pain erupted. The poacher collapsed to his knees, trying to push the beast away with his free hand. Gray shook his head, tearing flesh and jacket fabric, then unclenched his jaws and lunged at the second attacker, the bearded Brooks, who had managed to draw his pistol. A shot rang out, but the bullet missed, and in the next second the 400-pound wolf's body crashed onto the man. There was a crunch, either a collarbone or ribs breaking. The third poacher, Greg, bolted for the jeep, managed to open the door, and dove inside, slamming it shut moments before the wolf's fangs snapped dangerously close to his face. All of this took no more than 10 seconds. 2 big men writhed on the ground. The third, with trembling hands, tried to start the vehicle, but in his panic couldn't get the key into the ignition, and Gray, surprisingly, didn't finish off his vanquished enemies. He stepped back a few paces and now stood between them and Elena like a living barrier. His fur was ruffled, blood dripped from his fangs, but his eyes looked at the girl with the same devotion as they had years ago. You recognized me. It wasn't a question, but a statement. You came to protect me. The wolf let out a low, guttural sound, something between a growl and a whine. One of the injured poachers tried to get up again, and Gray instantly spun towards him, baring his bloody fangs. The man froze, afraid to move. "No need," Elena said softly. "That's enough. Let's go, Gray." To her astonishment, the wolf obeyed. He slowly retreated from his vanquished enemies, never taking his eyes off them, and approached the girl. A strong scent emanated from him, wild, forest-like, completely unlike that of domestic dogs. "We're leaving," Elena said loudly to the poachers, "and you get out of our forest, and don't ever come back. Ever!" "You'll regret this, girl," Butch White hissed, cradling his injured arm. "I'll get to you, and your old man, and that beast." Gray growled menacingly, and the poacher cut himself short. Elena slowly moved away from the road, deeper into the forest. The wolf followed her, occasionally glancing back at the poachers. Only when the sound of the jeep's engine starting faded in the distance did the beast relax a little. "Now listen to me." Elena stopped and turned to her unexpected protector. "We need to warn Dad. These people are very dangerous. They'll be back." The wolf tilted its head as if trying to understand the meaning of her words. "They'll come for us, do you understand?" The girl spoke slowly, clearly, just as she had in childhood, teaching Gray commands. "We need help. Can you bring Dad?" The wolf looked at her with its piercing amber eyes, unblinking. I think you understand. You always understood more than an ordinary wolf should." Elena crouched down to be at eye level with the animal. "Bring Dad, Gray. Find Mark. The ranger, remember?" At the word ranger, the wolf suddenly flinched and whimpered softly, like a pup hearing a familiar voice. "Yes, the ranger," Elena repeated hopefully. "Mark, my father. Bring him here." Gray looked at her for another moment, then turned and disappeared among the trees. His silvery fur flashed one last time among the green foliage and vanished. Silence fell, broken only by the chirping of birds and the rustling of wind in the canopy. Elena was left alone in the middle of the forest, unsure if she had done the right thing by letting the beast go. Would he understand? Would he fulfill her request? Or was it all just a figment of her imagination, and Gray was simply a wild wolf who had accidentally protected a human in his territory? Suddenly, the forest seemed alien and hostile to her. The tall firs seemed to close in around her, creating a gloomy twilight, and the familiar forest sounds now seemed ominous. Somewhere in the distance a branch snapped. Elena flinched. Who was it? The wolf returning with help? Or the poachers intent on revenge? "I need to get out of here," the girl decided. She knew the forest like the back of her hand and could find her way home from anywhere in the reserve. The only thing she feared was running into Butch and his cronies again. Elena cautiously moved towards the house, choosing obscure trails and trying to make no noise. Every rustle made her freeze and listen. From time to time she looked back, hoping to see the familiar silver silhouette, but all around was just the green wall of the forest. She leaned against the trunk of an old birch and closed her eyes. Memories from 10 years ago resurfaced. The small, whimpering bundle found beside its dead mother, sleepless nights when she fed the wolf pup with an eyedropper, its first clumsy steps around the house, the soft whimpering when Gray would sneak into her bed during a thunderstorm. "Wolves don't forget," her father had said, "neither kindness nor cruelty." Now she understood how right he had been. Gray hadn't forgotten them, hadn't forgotten the kindness that saved his life, and he had returned to repay them in kind. Elena snapped out of her reflections, hearing the crackle of branches somewhere to her right. Her heart thumped heavily. Had the poachers returned? Or was it Gray? Or "Lena!" A familiar voice cut through the thicket. "Lena, are you here?" "Dad!" she cried, rushing towards the sound. "I'm here!" They met in a small clearing, Mark, out of breath, shotgun at the ready, and Elena, tears of relief in her eyes. Her father embraced his daughter tightly. "Are you all right? Not hurt?" His hands felt her shoulders, her face, as if wanting to make sure she was unharmed. Branches clung to Mark's clothes. His face was covered in small scratches. It was clear he had run through the thicket, heedless of the path. His eyes gleamed frantically with anxiety and relief. "I'm fine, Dad," Elena smiled. "Gray saved me." "Gray?" the ranger frowned. "What are you talking about, daughter?" And then she noticed that behind her father, a few yards away, sat a silver-gray wolf. Its tongue hung from its mouth. It was panting heavily, as if after a long run. "He brought you," Elena whispered, disbelieving her own eyes. "He understood everything. He brought you to me." Mark turned and froze, seeing the animal. "Well, I'll be," was all he could manage. What a reunion! Gray rose and took a few steps towards them. He came closer than any wild wolf would come to a man with a shotgun. He stopped a couple of yards away and tilted his head, as if in a gesture of respect. "Hello, old friend," Mark said softly, lowering his shotgun. "Never thought you'd still remember us." The wolf sat on its hind legs and looked directly into the ranger's eyes. In its gaze was something more than just animal intelligence, a deep wisdom, an almost human understanding. "Dad, we're in trouble." Elena hastily told her father about the clash with the poachers, the wound Gray inflicted on Butch White, and his threats. "They said they'd be back, for me and for you." With each of her words, Mark's face grew darker. He listened attentively, without interrupting, but the muscles in his jaw worked more visibly. "And then Gray appeared," Elena continued. "As if from nowhere, he attacked them, saved me. And then," she faltered, realizing how incredible what she was about to say sounded, "then I asked him to bring you. And he understood, Dad. He really understood." Mark's expression darkened. "Yes, this is serious. Butch isn't one to let things like this slide. We need to go home and call the sheriff." "But can the sheriff even help us?" Elena asked doubtfully. "You yourself said Butch has people everywhere." "It's one thing to cover up poaching, another to attack a person." The ranger shook his head. "Besides, Nick Harrison is like a brother to me. He won't let us be harmed." But there was no conviction in his voice. Mark knew all too well how the system worked. Today, Nick was on his side, but tomorrow his superiors would tell him to stay out of it. And then what? As they turned toward the house, Gray also rose and followed, maintaining a distance of several yards. "He's seeing us off?" Elena smiled. "Looks like it," Mark nodded. "Only question is, why today of all days? Why did he come back after so many years?" "Maybe he was always nearby," the girl suggested. "We just didn't see him. You yourself said you sometimes noticed tracks around the house." "You're probably right," Mark mused. "Wolves are territorial animals. They protect their domain and everyone living in it. Maybe he considers us part of his pack?" On the way, Elena recounted everything in detail, how she was picking berries, how she ran into the poachers, and how Gray unexpectedly appeared. With each of her words, her father's face darkened further. "So, Butch already knows you're filing complaints with the prosecutor's office," the ranger mused, "and he knows about the environmentalists. This is bad, daughter. People like that don't stop halfway." "But we won't stop either, will we?" Elena's voice held determination. "This is our forest, Dad, and we must protect it." Mark smiled and hugged his daughter tightly. "Of course we won't stop, Lena. We'll just have to be twice as careful now." As they reached the edge of the woods, their house came into view. Gray stopped at the tree line and sat down, as if saying goodbye. Elena turned to him. "You're not coming with us?" His amber eyes gazed at her with the same wisdom as years ago, when she, a little girl, taught the pup commands. But now there was something new in them, an understanding of the boundary between two worlds, human and animal. The wolf merely looked at her with his wise eyes. "His place is in the forest, daughter," Mark said softly. "Always has been and always will be. But he's near, and now I know for sure that he'll protect us if needed." Elena nodded and waved at the wolf. "Thank you, Gray. Thank you for everything." And then she and her father headed for the house to call the sheriff, gather evidence, and prepare for a new chapter in the endless war with the poachers. On the way, Mark pulled out his cell phone. "Nick, it's me. Listen closely. We have trouble. No, more serious than usual. Butch White Yes, that one. Get over here. I'll tell you everything. He quickly outlined the situation, omitting only Gray's role. Some things were better explained in person, not over the phone. You think he'd really risk doing something bad to us? Elena asked when her father finished the call. I don't know, daughter, Mark answered honestly. But it's not worth the risk. Butch is the kind of man who's used to solving problems with force. And for him, we're a big problem. Gray remained seated at the edge of the forest, watching the two people who had once saved his life. The wind ruffled his silver fur, and the setting sun was reflected in his amber eyes. He was connected to them by invisible threads, not owner and pet, but equal allies, guardians of the same land. The wolf rose, stretched, and slowly disappeared among the trees. He had much to do in the forest depths, where a new danger already awaited his domain. But now, Gray knew, if needed, he would always find his way back to the people who had once given him life. Deputy Nick Harrison arrived an hour later, a lean, fit man with sharp gray eyes and early graying at the temples. He and Mark had served together in the Army, in the Border Patrol, and their friendship, tempered in harsh conditions, had withstood the test of time. All right, tell me everything in order, Nick said, settling at the kitchen table. He pulled out a worn notebook and pen, an old habit, though now all statements were supposed to be recorded on a voice recorder. Elena recounted in detail the encounter in the forest, how the poachers had stopped her, how they had threatened her, about her father, and how she filed complaints, meaning Butch knew about their activities against him. The deputy's frown deepened with every word. And how did you manage to get away? The girl hesitated, glancing at her father. I was saved. By whom? Harrison looked at her sharply. Someone local? Why didn't he come with you? It's complicated, Nick, Mark interjected. Remember the story about the wolf pup Elena and I found about 10 years ago? Oh, right. The deputy nodded. You nursed him back to health and then released him into the wild. What does that have to do with... He trailed off, looking incredulously from Mark to Elena. Wait, are you trying to tell me that... Exactly, the ranger confirmed. Our Gray has returned, and it seems he's protecting not only his territory, but us as well. Nick leaned back in his chair, processing what he'd heard. You know, Mark, if anyone else told me this, I'd think they were drunk or out of their mind. But I believe you. Just don't write that in the report. The ranger chuckled. Just write that Lena managed to escape when they were distracted. I'll do that. The deputy nodded. But I need to know the truth to understand what we're dealing with. He paused, tapping his pen on the notebook. So, the wolf attacked them? Are they injured? Butch has a torn arm, Elena confirmed. And the other one, it seems, has a broken collarbone. The third managed to hide in the car. This is bad, Harrison frowned. Now they have a motive for revenge, and they can involve official authorities, claiming there's a rabid wolf in the forest attacking people, and they need to organize a culling. That won't happen. Mark shook his head. To order a culling, they'd have to admit they were in the reserve, and that's already a violation. Butch will find a way to circumvent the law, the deputy said grimly. He has connections statewide, money. I wouldn't be surprised if tomorrow they announce urgent measures to protect the public from predators. What are we going to do? Elena asked anxiously. First of all, Nick snapped his notebook shut. We'll file an official statement about the threats. Then I'll contact the Environmental Prosecutor's Office. I have a detective friend there, and I'll look into Butch's current dealings. Maybe there's something we can pin on him." He paused, thinking, then added, "And you two, be careful, very careful. No solitary walks in the woods, no excursions without a weapon. Stick together." When the deputy left, Mark and Elena sat on the porch for a long time, looking at the darkening forest. Somewhere out there, in the nocturnal thicket, was their Gray, a wild beast with a human heart. And they knew, as long as he was near, the forest was safe. "Do you think, Dad," Elena asked softly, "he understands that we're in danger?" "I'm sure he does," Mark nodded. "Wolves are incredibly intelligent creatures, and Gray, he's special." The ranger put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. "Don't worry, we'll handle it. We always have." That night, Elena couldn't sleep for a long time. She lay in her room, the very room where she had once put the small wolf pup to sleep, and listened to the sounds of the forest outside her window. It seemed to her that amidst the rustling leaves and the hoot of an owl, she could make out the quiet breathing of a huge beast guarding their peace. Then she had a dream. She was a little girl again, running through the forest, and beside her was a silver-gray wolf, enormous, majestic. They ran together, free, happy, and ahead lay an endless forest, full of mysteries and wonders. In the morning, she was awakened by a phone call. It was Nick Harrison. His voice was anxious. "Mark, have you watched the news today? No? Turn it on immediately. State news." She and Elena went downstairs to the living room and turned on the old television. On the screen was a breaking news banner. Then a serious-faced anchor appeared. "A tragedy occurred last night in the Timberline Reserve. A group of hunters with official permits to hunt boar was attacked by a wolf pack. 2 men with serious injuries have been hospitalized in the state capital. One is in critical condition." According to the survivors, the attack was unprovoked and sudden. In connection with this, the state governor has signed an order for a temporary permit to cull wolves in the area to ensure the safety of local residents. "Those bastards!" Mark gritted through clenched teeth. "They've twisted everything upside down." "What permit?" Elena exclaimed in indignation. "Any hunting is strictly forbidden in the reserve." "They'll backdate it," her father replied grimly. "Butch has people everywhere." The news continued. According to Wildlife Management Director Connor White, there has been an increase in sightings of wolves near populated areas recently. Experts attribute this to an ecological imbalance and a reduction in the natural food supply for predators. Butch appeared on screen in a white hospital gown, with a bandaged arm and an expression of noble indignation on his face. "We are concerned about the current situation. Our hunters have always followed all the rules, but this time the wolves behaved erratically. It's possible there are sick individuals among them, or even an entire pack that has lost its fear of humans. We are forced to take emergency measures to protect people." "Emergency measures?" Mark mimicked him. "No, would you look at this actor? And just yesterday he himself was a poacher threatening my daughter." Elena stood pale, biting her lip. "Dad, they'll kill Gray and all the wolves around here." "They won't," the ranger replied resolutely, grabbing his phone. "I won't let them." He dialed Nick Harrison's number. "Nick, did you see that?" "Yes, it's a real circus. Listen, I need help. Contact your friend at the prosecutor's office immediately. Have him check if Butch had a hunting permit yesterday, and where he even got a weapon if he surrendered his hunting license 3 years ago for poaching. Mark spoke quickly, clearly, as if issuing a battle command. This was no longer the good-natured ranger, but an experienced fighter, ready to defend his territory by all means. Finishing the conversation, he turned to his daughter. "Lena, get ready. We're going to the district office, to the reserve superintendent. He needs to know the truth." "What about Gray?" Elena asked anxiously. "What if the hunters are already in the forest?" "Wolves know how to hide," her father reassured her. "Besides, our Gray isn't just any wolf. He's smarter than many people. Don't worry, he'll be fine." But deep down, Mark wasn't so sure. He knew all too well what Butch White was capable of when cornered. And now, with not only his business, but also his freedom at stake, the poacher became especially dangerous. They quickly gathered their things and walked out to the yard, where her father's old pickup stood. Mark started the engine, and the truck, grumbling heavily, pulled away. And at that moment, a long, mournful howl echoed from the forest. Plaintive, piercing, soul-wrenching. For a moment it seemed not like the cry of a beast, but of a human soul, trapped in an animal body. "Gray," Elena whispered. "Is he saying goodbye?" "No." Mark shook his head. "He's warning us. It's a danger signal." And as if to confirm his words, headlights from several vehicles appeared on the road leading to their house. They moved quickly, purposefully, and Mark immediately understood. These were not ordinary visitors. "Butch's men," he gritted through clenched teeth. "And it looks like not just them. That SUV there, it's from the State Fish and Wildlife Department." "What are we going to do?" Elena instinctively pressed against her father, as she had in childhood when fearing thunderstorms. "We're going," Mark said decisively, "to the forest." "But how?" "We have a better chance in the forest than here," her father interrupted her. "And they can do anything. A search, a provocation, a random fire. Knowing Butch, I wouldn't be surprised by anything." He turned off the engine, quickly got out of the truck, and opened the trunk. He pulled out a backpack with an emergency kit. The ranger always had such a kit ready for sudden outings or natural disasters. "Dad," Elena watched the approaching cars. "They're close." "We'll make it," Mark said confidently. "Let's go to the back gate, quietly." They slipped through the garden, scaled the low fence, and emerged at the edge of the forest, just as the first car pulled up to their house. "Now run," Mark whispered, "and don't look back." They plunged into the thicket, trying to move as quietly as possible. The ranger knew these parts like the back of his hand and led his daughter along barely visible trails, avoiding open spaces. Behind them, shouts echoed. Having found the empty house, the pursuers began to comb the area. "Get the dogs!" Butch White's sharp voice reached them. "They couldn't have gone far." "And there's a wolf track," another voice called out. "Fresh. Get the wolf, too. All the wolves around here. Kill 'em!" The voices gradually faded into the distance. Mark led his daughter deeper and deeper into the forest. Only when they were at a safe distance did he allow himself to stop and catch his breath. "Where are we going, Dad?" Elena asked softly. "To the shamaness," the ranger replied. "To old Rachel. She lives so far from any roads that Butch will never find her. And if he does," he chuckled, "he'll regret it. And then what? We can't hide forever." "Then I'll contact Nick." Mark patted the pocket where his cell phone lay. and he'll rouse everyone he can, real environmentalists, journalists, the prosecutor's office. It's not as simple as Butch thinks. There are still honest people in this country. They walked for several hours, penetrating into the most remote part of the reserve. The path led through windfalls, ravines, and bush-covered hills. Several times they had to wade through streams, so the dogs couldn't pick up their scent. With each step, the forest became wilder, more primal. There were no longer any traces of human activity, no clearings, no hunting blinds, no tourist trails. Only trees, mighty, ancient, and animals, feeling completely safe. Closer to evening, they emerged into a small clearing, in the center of which stood a small cabin, roofed with blackened, weathered shakes. A fire burned near the cabin, and beside it sat an old woman in strange clothing, reminiscent of traditional Native American attire. "Rachel!" Mark called out to her. "May we come in?" The old woman slowly turned her head. Her face, crisscrossed with deep wrinkles, seemed carved from dark wood. "I've been waiting," she rasped in a voice like the rustle of dry leaves. "Waiting since morning. I had a dream. The ranger came with his daughter, and behind them the Gray Spirit." "What Gray Spirit?" Mark asked, surprised, helping his daughter over a fallen tree that blocked the path to the cabin. "The one you call Gray." The old woman chuckled, revealing sparse but strong teeth. "But to us, he is Humpolen, the Gray Spirit of the forest, the guardian." She rose, small, wizened, but surprisingly straight for her years. Rachel was well past 80, yet she moved with the ease of someone half her age. "Come in," she invited, dusting off her hands. "Dinner's ready," the spirit said. "Guests will come. They must be fed." Mark and Elena exchanged glances. They hadn't warned the shamaness of their visit. There simply hadn't been an opportunity. How could she have known they were coming? Inside, the cabin was unexpectedly spacious and cozy. Benches lined the walls, covered with homespun rugs. A gleaming old stove with polished sides stood in the corner, and bundles of dried herbs hung from the ceiling, filling the air with a spicy aroma. "Wash up and sit down." Rachel pointed to a clay wash basin in the corner. "Get water from the barrel. It's clean. Spring water." While the guests freshened up, the old woman took out clay bowls and wooden spoons, placing a pot of steaming stew on the table. "Eat," she said when Mark and Elena were seated at the table. "You'll need your strength. Great trials lie ahead." "You know about our trouble?" the ranger asked cautiously. "I know." The old woman nodded. "I know everything. About the evil man who harms the forest, and about your wolf, and about how Butch White has now declared war not only on people, but on animals too." She paused, then added, looking directly into Elena's eyes, "But most of all, he's angry at your wolf, at Gray, because he maimed his hand and shamed him before people. Butch doesn't forgive such things." "But how can we protect Gray?" the girl asked, agitated. "And the other wolves? Now the poachers have free rein. Under the guise of protecting against predators, they might exterminate all the animals in the reserve." "It's not so simple." The shamaness shook her head. "Not just guns decide who lives and who dies. There are forces older than human laws. There are spirits that guard the forest and its inhabitants. And there is a connection between you and Gray, a bond that no one can break." "But what can we do right now?" Mark asked impatiently. "We need a concrete plan, not riddles." The old woman wasn't offended by his abruptness. "There is a plan." She pointed her wrinkled finger at the phone the ranger had placed on the table. "Call your police friend. Tell him you have evidence against Butch. Real evidence that will put him away for a long time." "What evidence?" Mark asked, surprised. "I don't have anything like that." "You do," Rachel said confidently. "In your house, in the old trunk in the attic. There's a camera trap. Remember you set it last fall in Wolf Gulch? Well, it captured Butch and his cronies at the moment they killed an elk, a protected species. You can't mistake it for a licensed hunt. Those antlers are distinct." Mark stared at the old woman in shock. "But how did you—" "I never told anyone the camera was missing. I thought the poachers found and destroyed it." "They didn't destroy it?" The shamaness shook her head. "Your wolf found it and brought it to your house. You just didn't see it. He came at night. The memory card is intact there. Everything is recorded. For that, Butch will be locked up for good. He already has a suspended sentence." Elena looked from her father to the old woman and back. "Dad, is this true? Could Gray really—" "I don't know," Mark answered honestly. "But it's worth checking. If there really are such images there, it will change everything." He took out his phone and dialed Harrison's number. The connection here, deep in the forest, was weak, but the signal still came through, one bar on the mobile screen. "Nick, can you hear me?" Mark spoke loudly as if trying to shout across the distance. "Listen carefully. I should have a trail camera in the old trunk in my attic. Check it. There might be a recording of Butch poaching. Yes, it's serious. No, I can't come back. They're hunting me. Try to get the camera discreetly. Don't expose it prematurely." The conversation was repeatedly interrupted by static, but Mark managed to convey the main points. Finishing, he turned to Rachel. "What now?" "Now we wait," the old woman replied calmly. "Wait and prepare. Not only Butch is hunting you, his men are combing the forest, but the Gray Spirit is leading them in circles, back and forth on false trails. They'll get tired soon. They'll be angry, dangerous." She paused, then added, looking at Elena, "And you, girl, have the hardest task. You will have to meet Gray alone and decide his fate." "What?" The girl stared at the old woman in confusion. "What fate? I don't understand." "You will?" The shamaness nodded. "When the time comes, you will understand. For now, rest. The night will be troubled." Elena awoke to a strange sound, a long, plaintive howl that seemed to pierce her very soul. She sat up on the bench that served as her bed and looked around. The cabin was dark, with only a faint moonbeam filtering through the small window. Her father slept on the neighboring bench, snoring softly, but the shamaness was nowhere to be seen. The howl sounded again, closer, clearer. Elena realized it was Gray. He was calling her. Trying not to make a sound, she pulled on her jacket, put on her boots, and cautiously stepped out of the cabin. The night was clear and cool. The full moon bathed the clearing in silvery light, transforming ordinary bushes and trees into mysterious figures from a fairy tale. At the edge of the clearing, where the dense fir stand began, stood a dark figure. At first, Elena thought it was Rachel, but then she realized, too tall, too straight, it wasn't the old woman. "Who's there?" she called softly, taking a step forward. The figure didn't answer, but made an inviting gesture with its hand. Elena thought she saw the gleam of amber eyes in the darkness. "Gray?" the girl whispered. "Is that you?" Again a howl, long, beckoning, but it came not from the figure at the edge of the forest, but from deep within the woods. Elena hesitated. The most sensible thing would be to wake her father, but something told her this invitation was for her alone. Some deep, intuitive knowledge told her she had nothing to fear. Gathering her courage, the girl headed towards a figure at the edge of the forest. The closer she got, the clearer her certainty became. This was not a human, too tall, too still, and those eyes, they glowed in the dark, like an animal's. "Who are you?" Elena asked, stopping a few feet from the strange entity. "I am the forest's guardian," a low, rumbling voice spoke, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "And you are the wolf's protectress." "You, the gray spirit?" the girl asked uncertainly, recalling the shamaness's words. "I am he who was always and will always be," the voice replied evasively. "As long as the forest stands, as long as wolves roam its depths, as long as people remember the ancient laws." The figure took a step to the side, pointing somewhere into the forest depths. "Go. He awaits you. Only you can save him." "Who awaits? Gray?" Elena strained to see into the darkness, but saw only tree trunks and wisps of mist clinging to the ground. "But how will I find my way?" "With your heart," the voice answered. "Follow the call." And as if in response, the howl of a wolf echoed from the forest again, long, mournful, piercing the soul. Elena took a deep breath and stepped into the forest. The strange figure dissolved into the night mist, as if it had never been there. Only the soft rustle of leaves accompanied the girl. She walked, heedless of the path, guided only by the call that resonated in her heart. Something invisible seemed to lead her past fallen trees and ravines, choosing the easiest route. Mist curled at her feet, silvery in the moonlight, lending an air of unreality, of fairy tale, to everything that was happening. Finally, Elena emerged into a small clearing surrounded by ancient oaks. In the center of the clearing, on a large mossy boulder, sat an enormous, silver-gray wolf. He looked directly at her, his amber eyes glowing in the darkness. "Gray?" Elena whispered. "Is that really you?" The wolf whined softly, as if answering her question, and jumped off the rock. He was so enormous that when he stood beside the girl, his shoulder blades were level with her shoulder. Elena reached out and gently touched his coarse, silver fur. The wolf didn't pull away. Instead, he pressed against her palm as if seeking affection. "Why did you call me?" the girl asked softly. "Are you in danger?" Gray raised his head and looked directly into her eyes. And suddenly, Elena understood, clearly, distinctly, as if he were speaking in a human voice. The wolf wasn't calling her for help. He was offering help himself. "You want to protect us?" she whispered. "My father and me?" The wolf growled softly, and the sound struck the girl as affirmative. "But how? There are too many of them. They have weapons." Gray turned and took a few steps toward the forest, then looked back, as if inviting her to follow. Elena, after a moment's hesitation, followed the wolf. They moved through the forest like shadows, soundlessly, effortlessly. The girl marveled at how deftly she navigated obstacles in the dark, as if she could see at night, like the wolf. Several times she thought other wolves were running alongside them. Gray shadows flickered between the trees, but when she tried to glimpse them, they vanished like morning mist. Soon they came to a small cliff, in which a dark cave entrance gaped. Gray stopped and looked at Elena as if asking, "Will you follow me?" "In there?" the girl asked uncertainly, peering into the dark maw. "Why?" The wolf whined softly, and in that sound was such pleading that Elena made up her mind. "All right, I'll go with you." They entered the cave. Inside it was dark, but not absolutely so. A strange greenish light seeped from the walls, allowing them to discern the path. The air was damp and cool, smelling of moss and something else. Ancient, mysterious. The cave was deep. They walked along a narrow corridor that gradually widened. Finally the corridor ended, and Elena emerged into a spacious hall. What she saw there made her freeze in astonishment. In the middle of the hall, on a stone rise, lay a wolf, silver-gray, like gray, but with a white mark on her chest. Beside her, huddled against her side, whimpered 3 tiny wolf pups, so small they looked like toys. Elena immediately understood. The wolf was wounded. Her side was bloody, her breathing heavy and uneven. She struggled to lift her head when Gray and the girl entered the hall. "This is your family?" Elena asked, stunned. Gray whimpered softly and went to the wolf, gently nudging her muzzle with his nose. Then he turned to Elena, and in his eyes the girl read a plea. "You want me to help her?" she whispered, approaching the injured animal. Now Elena saw the wound clearly, a bullet hole in her side, blood caked on her silver fur. The wolf was alive, but without help. Inevitable death awaited her, and after her, the death of the pups, too small to survive without their mother. "I'm no vet," Elena said helplessly. "I don't know how to treat her." But then she remembered. Her father always carried a first aid kit, not just for himself, but for any injured animals he found in the woods. And Elena had also learned to administer first aid, to stitch wounds, stop bleeding, extract bullets. "I need instruments," she said resolutely. "A first aid kit, bandages, alcohol." Gray whimpered again, but this time his voice held impatience. He went to the cave wall and pawed at something lying in the corner. Elena came closer and saw an old leather bag, the kind village medics carried in the mid-last century. Opening the bag, the girl found inside a set of medical instruments, bandages, and some vials of herbal tinctures. "Where did this come from?" she asked in astonishment, but the question hung in the air. Without wasting time, Elena returned to the wounded wolf. The animal watched her with wariness, but made no attempt to bite when the girl carefully examined the wound. "The bullet passed through," Elena murmured. "That's good, but the wound might be infected." She opened one of the vials, sniffed the contents. It smelled of alcohol and some herbs. It would do for disinfection. The next hour passed in tense work. Elena cleaned the wound, removed several small fragments she found with tweezers, stitched it up, and bandaged the wolf's side. The whole time, Gray never left his mate's side, whimpering softly as if encouraging her. Finally, the work was done. Elena leaned back, wiping sweat from her brow. "I did everything I could. Now we wait. If infection doesn't set in, she'll survive." The wolf stirred weakly, gratefully licking the girl's hand. The pups huddled against their mother, instinctively seeking her warmth and milk. "They need to be fed," Elena worried. "They're so small, and their mother is weak." Gray approached her, gently took her sleeve in his teeth, and tugged towards the exit. It was clear he wanted her to follow him. "I understand." The girl nodded. "You need to hunt for your family, and I need to go back to Dad. He'll be worried." They emerged from the cave. Outside, dawn was breaking. The east was painted a soft pink. The night was over, but to Elena it felt like an eternity had passed. Gray led her back, choosing the shortest path. They moved quickly and silently, like shadows among the trees. Several times the wolf stopped, sniffing, changing direction. It seemed he was avoiding places where people might be. As they approached the shamaness's cabin, Gray suddenly stopped and tensed. His fur bristled, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. "What is it?" Elena asked, alarmed. "Is there danger there?" The wolf looked at her so expressively that words were unnecessary. Yes, trouble awaited there. Elena cautiously peered from behind a bush and saw a black jeep parked in the clearing in front of the cabin, and several armed men beside it. "Poachers!" she whispered in horror. "They found us. But where's Dad? And Rachel?" As if in answer to her question, the cabin door burst open, and Mark appeared on the threshold, disheveled, barefoot, but with a shotgun in his hands. "I'm asking one last time." Butch White's voice reached them. "Where's your daughter? And where is that cursed wolf?" "I don't know," the ranger replied stubbornly. "And if I did, I wouldn't tell you. Get off my land, Butch. You're not welcome here." "This isn't your land any more," the poacher sneered. "Soon there'll be a hunting resort here, and the reserve will only be a name, for reports to headquarters." He gestured to his men. "Search the cabin and the woods around it. The girl's around here somewhere. I can feel it." Elena's blood ran cold. If they found her, her father would rush to protect her, and then who knew how it would end? And if Butch saw Gray, the wolf would simply be shot on the spot. "What do we do?" she whispered, addressing herself more than Gray. And then a voice spoke, the same low, rumbling voice she had heard at night. "Call your friends brethren. Only they can help now." Elena flinched and looked around. No one was nearby, only Gray, looking at her with his amber eyes. "Brethren?" she repeated. "Which brethren?" But she already understood. She remembered the shamaness's words about the gray spirit, about the ancient laws of the forest. She remembered the gray shadows flickering between the trees as they walked to the cave. Elena knelt beside the wolf and hugged his neck. "Gray," she whispered, "we need help. Your pack? Are they nearby?" The wolf whimpered softly, and the girl felt the muscles under her hands tensed, ready for action. "Call them," she pleaded. "Please." And Gray threw back his head. A long, powerful howl erupted from his chest, echoing through the forest. It sounded like a battle cry, a call to arms. In the clearing, Butch and his men froze, hearing that sound. "A wolf!" one of the poachers exclaimed. "Very close." "It's him!" Butch hissed, grabbing his gun. "The gray devil! Now I'll get him!" But he didn't finish. From all sides, from behind the trees, from the bushes, as if from the very earth, wolves appeared. Dozens of wolves, with blazing eyes and bared fangs. They surrounded the clearing in a tight ring, cutting off the men's path to retreat. Butch White raised his shotgun, aiming at the nearest beast, but one of his assistants grabbed his arm. "Don't shoot, boss. There are too many of them. We won't have time to reload." The wolves slowly narrowed the circle. They moved in sync, like a single organism, with terrifying coordination. There were no less than 20 of them, huge, lean, with powerful jaws. "To the car!" Butch shouted, retreating towards the jeep. "Quickly!" But the car keys remained in the ranger's hands, and the jeep itself was already surrounded by wolves. The beasts jumped onto the hood. The roof clung to it from all sides. Mark stood on the porch, disbelieving his eyes. In 30 years of working in the forest, He had never seen wolves attack a group of armed adults. It contradicted everything he knew about their behavior. "Holy saints!" the ranger whispered, crossing himself. "What is this?" Old Rachel appeared beside him. She watched what was happening with astonishing calm, as if everything was proceeding according to some plan known only to her. "The Gray Spirit has called his brethren," she said softly. "Now the forest itself decides who lives and who goes." A tall silver-gray figure detached itself from the edge of the forest. The enormous wolf slowly walked into the clearing. Behind him, a little further back, walked Elena. "Lena!" Mark exclaimed, rushing to his daughter. "Are you okay? Where have you been?" "I'm fine, Dad." The girl smiled, hugging her father. "I was with Gray." She turned to the poachers surrounded by wolves. "Butch!" Her voice sounded unexpectedly firm. "Drop your weapon. You've lost." "I'd like to see some snot-nosed girl," White began, but then cut himself short as Gray growled and took a step forward. The gang leader slowly placed his shotgun on the ground. His men followed suit. "Good," Elena nodded. "Now listen carefully. You will never set foot in this forest again, neither you nor your men, with or without weapons. This is the land of the wolves and those who respect their laws." "And what if I refuse?" Butch hissed through clenched teeth. "Then you will never leave here," the girl simply replied, and there was something in her voice, some ancient inhuman certainty, that even the seasoned poacher believed this was no idle threat. Mark stepped forward. "Get out, and remember this. We have evidence of all your crimes. If even one wolf in this reserve is killed, if even one poacher appears on this land, that evidence will go where it needs to go, and no connections will help you." Butch paled. "What evidence?" "A trail camera." The ranger smiled. "The very one you were looking for but couldn't find. It shows you personally shooting a protected elk, and much more. The camera is with Deputy Harrison now. So choose. Either you leave us in this forest alone forever, or—" "Fine," Butch spat. "Take your stinking forest. But remember, in the big world, wolves don't call the shots. There are different laws there, and sooner or later they'll reach even your neck of the woods." "Maybe," Mark nodded, "but not today. Now, take your men and leave, and remember, the forest sees everything. The forest remembers everything." The ranger threw the jeep keys at the poacher's feet. Gradually, the wolves parted, forming a narrow corridor to the vehicle. Butch and his cronies quickly and carefully reached the car, started the engine, and, without looking back, drove away from the clearing. Only when the dust from the tires settled and the sound of the engine faded in the distance did Gray relax. He approached Elena and sat beside her, leaning against her leg. The other wolves also stopped snarling. Some even lay down on the grass as if tired of their unusual role. "What was that?" Mark asked, still shaken. "I've never seen wolves act so human." "These aren't just wolves anymore, Dad," Elena replied softly. "They've changed. Gray changed them. He taught them not to fear humans, but also not to attack without cause. He created a new pack, a pack that protects the forest just like we do." She told her father about her nighttime journey, about the wounded wolf in the cave, about the pups, about how Gray had asked for help. "They're his family," the girl concluded, "like you and me, and he protects us and them." Old Rachel, who had been listening to their conversation, nodded approvingly. "Old bonds are being re-established," she rasped, as in ancient times, when man and beast were closer to each other. When they understood, they had a common home and a common enemy. So what now? Mark asked. Now begins a war, the old woman replied calmly. Not with guns and traps, but with papers and seals. Butch White is not one to retreat easily. He will look for other ways to get to the reserve. Then we will also look for ways to protect it, Elena said resolutely. She knelt beside Gray and hugged him around the neck. Thank you for everything. The wolf licked her cheek, as he had done in childhood when he was just a pup. Then he slowly rose, walked a few steps away, and looked back, as if inviting them to follow. He wants to show us something, Elena realized. Let's go. Mark nodded. I'll just grab my shotgun just in case. Who knows who else might be wandering in the woods? They followed the wolf, who confidently led them through the thickets, choosing the easiest path. Behind them, at a respectful distance, followed several other wolves from the pack, like an honor guard. Half an hour later, they emerged into a small clearing surrounded by tall firs. At the edge of the clearing rose an enormous boulder, gray-green with moss, crisscrossed with ancient cracks. This is Bear Rock, Mark said, surprised. I haven't been here in 15 years. Not since the blasting started nearby. I thought it was impassable now. Gray approached the rock and sat beside it, looking at the people with his intelligent eyes. This is a sacred place, Rachel said softly. To Mark and Elena's surprise, the old woman had quietly joined their company. Here, people once made a pact with the forest spirits. They would not harm the animals without need, and the spirits would protect them from illness and misfortune. What pact? Mark frowned. That's just an old legend. All legends were once true, the shamaness smiled, and all truths eventually become legends. And then truths again. The circle of life, Mark Corbin, the circle of life. She approached the boulder and placed her wrinkled palm on it. This stone is thousands of years old. It remembers when no human foot trod here, and it remembers the first meeting of man and wolf, how they first feared each other, then learned to respect, and then to help. The wolf shared its prey, man, fire, and shelter, and this was long before people domesticated dogs, horses, and cattle. The old woman surveyed the clearing. Here, the boundary between worlds is thin. Here, you can hear the voices of ancestors and see what is hidden from ordinary eyes. She turned to Gray, who had been sitting motionlessly by the stone all this time. The Gray Spirit brought you here for a reason. He wants to renew the ancient pact. What pact? Elena asked, bewildered. A pact between wolves and humans, Rachel answered. Between the forest and those who protect it. He offers an alliance. The pack will guard the reserve, and you will help the pack when needed. Elena pondered. The old woman's words sounded fantastic, almost fairy tale-like. And yet, wasn't that what had been happening all this time? Hadn't Gray protected them from the poachers? Hadn't she herself helped his injured mate? I agree, the girl said firmly. I will protect the forest and the wolves with all my strength. And so will I, Mark nodded. Though, admittedly, it all sounds a bit strange. A pact with wolves? What will people say? And people don't need to know, the shamaness chuckled. What happens in the forest stays in the forest. For the outside world, you'll have reports, numbers, documents. But here, she didn't finish, but it was clear enough. Here, other rules applied, ancient ones, like the forest itself. Gray rose and approached first Elena, then Mark. He looked into their eyes, long, intently, as if testing their resolve. Then he unexpectedly lifted his right paw, as he had done in childhood when the girl taught him commands. Elena laughed and shook the wolf's paw. "It's a deal, my friend." Mark followed her example, feeling a little awkward, and grown man shaking a wild animal's paw. But something told him this gesture held far more significance than it might seem. Gray stepped back a few paces and suddenly threw his head back in a long howl. Other wolves surrounding the clearing joined him. The howling intensified, filling the forest, echoing off the surrounding mountains. "They accept the pact," Rachel explained. "Now this is your shared land and your shared responsibility." 5 years passed. Much changed in the life of Timberline and the reserve. Butch White eventually came under investigation, not for poaching, but for tax evasion and falsifying documents. As often happens, the big predator was caught on small details. His hunting complex was never built, and the territory he planned to seize status as a federally protected wilderness area. Elena finished university and returned home. Now she worked as a research scientist in the very reserve her father had once protected. Mark retired, but still helped his daughter. His experience and knowledge of the area were invaluable. New camera traps, automatic sensors, and satellite communication appeared in the forest. But all these technologies were merely supplements to the main force guarding the reserve, the wolf pack, led by the silver-gray alpha. Gray no longer came to the ranger's cabin, no longer allowed himself to be petted, no longer sat by the fire with people. He had become truly wild, as he was meant to be. But sometimes, on particularly frosty winter nights, Elena would hear a distant howl from the mountain peaks, long, powerful, unmistakable, and she would respond by going to the window and lighting a candle for a few minutes. "I'm here. I remember. I keep our pact." And in Timberline, a legend circulates about an old silver-gray wolf who protects the forest and its guardians. They say his tracks have been seen near the ranger's house in the hardest times. They say his howl was heard on the night Butch White's gang tried to set the Corbin house on fire. They say he appears out of nowhere when danger leaves no hope of rescue. "The Silver Guardian," the locals whisper, seeing enormous tracks at the forest edge. And every child in the village knows, if you get lost in the forest, call for Gray. If you're lucky, he'll lead you back to people, because wolves don't forget kindness. And the forest lives and breathes and whispers secrets to its guardians, and the shadows among the trees guard their secrets until the time comes to reveal them to those who are worthy. Thank you for watching. What do you think of this story? Share your thoughts. Your comments are very valuable to us.